Sei gegrüßt, meine liebe Mitdenker und Trinker. For this, the third part, the third video, where we examine the vexed question of, based upon their recorded output, can Rainbow be regarded as a great band? Okay, last time when we left it, the count was 3 albums to 1 in favor of that idea, which I admit does go against my initial assertion. However, today we're going to examine albums 3 and 5. Okay, we ended last time with the departure of Cozy Powell and Graham Bonnet from the band. They were replaced respectively by drummer Bobby Rondinelli and singer Joe Lyn Turner. Now this is important. Why? Well, for as much as Down to Earth was a deliberate attempt to move the music in a more mainstream direction, the music it contains was, okay, as you remember, I was not particularly enamored of it, but still, it still retained a certain blues-based, hard, rockish edge to it, feel to it. And in many ways, Graham Bonnet was the ideal singer for this type of music, for that album. His voice did have the required raw power. It had a certain gruff edge to it. It had some grit and character to his voice. Could say that this album was still, for all its myriad of shortcomings, was still very much grounded in sort of European rock sensibilities. Songs may have come across as some sort of second-rate Free Bad Company type of thing, but they still affected a certain rawness to them. They still had a certain bite to them. The appointment of Joe Lyn Turner signaled another change in direction. Yes, we are still, going down the mainstream route, but the direction is now going to take on a very much more American feel to it, a very much more sleek, polished, even more radio-friendly sound. And this is the point where we legitimately start making the Boston, the Journey, Foreigner comparisons even. Contributions, really, yeah. Okay, just to set the scene. Now, eventually, released in 1981, we do get Difficult to Cure. Right, okay. I Surrender opens the album, and it is a most blatant concession to the American market. It was written by Russ Ballard, again, who we remember from last time. He wrote Since I've Been Gone. And it's a very sleek, it's a hook-laden, unapologetically commercial effort built around a very glossy chorus, and it's clearly designed for FM radio airplay. Joe Lyn Turner delivers his vocal with polish, I suppose one could say, and a certain amount of control, but his performance, especially vis-a-vis what's come before in the Rainbow, his performance comes across as conspicuously camp, soft-edged, and oddly effete, or limp-wristed if we want to be cruder about it. It lacks any sense of grit, danger, drama, or character. You've heard this type of so many times. It's unfortunately anonymous. Okay, there are a couple of nice noodles from Blackmore in this song, but scant consolation is that. And ultimately, it's just a very generic pop rock effort. It's slickly even executed by obviously very talented musicians. It is utterly anonymous. It's entirely divorced from the band's earlier identity. Okay, it's followed up with Spotlight Kid, which is, in fairness, a bit harder, a bit heavier, a bit faster, very much more guitar-driven, riff-driven, and it does make overtures in the direction of, let's say, rock credibility. But the truth of the matter is, this is very clearly Kill the King, is it not? Retooled for the new era, for the 80s. Okay, Blackmore's riff is again sharp, it's energetic. Even Turner sounds slightly more engaged in this. But it just lacks the danger, the urgency, the sheer ferocity that made its predecessor so great. Lyrics are thin, cliched. And while I said it does have some momentum and some bite to it, it ultimately feels formulaic. Especially if you think this is, Kill the King retreaded, which one could, when Kill the King itself, one could argue was a retread of Burn, and prior to that, Highway Star. If you want more ammunition for that particular argument, just look at the construction and style of the guitar solos on each of the 4 songs. You see, the antecedents of Spotlight Kid going back very much to Highway Star. It's not a bad song. Next up was No Release. Yeah, really. How opposite. But this is where the album's problems really do start to become apparent. It's a mid-tempo plod with a very bland melodic top line and a uninvolving nondescript chorus. It's competently played, as you would expect. It's neatly produced. It's performed. Nonetheless, it is a track. It just goes nowhere. It's one of far too many fillers we'll find on this album. Actually, it was written by Brian Moran. I'd forgotten about that. So I always thought Russ Ballard was the only outside writer they engaged, but no, I was wrong. Know nothing about even Brian Moran. Although all I can say is it does underscore the argument, perhaps, that that outside writers were not proving to be a great artistic success in this environment. I don't know. It's just one of these things. It gets annoying quite quickly, doesn't it? It's far too lightweight. It's disposable. Too soft a groove. Melody is pleasant but forgettable, and the lyric is entirely consequential. And vocally, again, this is Joe Lyn Turner, back to his most effeminate. I don't know if Ronnie Dio ever listened to this, but if he did, especially this song, he must have been pissing himself. This is Rainbow reduced to a just about serviceable AOR outfit. Okay, we move on to Vielleicht das nächste Mal. It's a brief instrumental. It's over 3 minutes. It's a really nice instrumental, very atmospheric, played with a lot of restraint by Blackmore, whose touch here is delicate, reflective, and, it does actually, for a moment, suggest a depth that rarely appears elsewhere on this album. It's short, to the point, but unfortunately, given that, it functions more like a palate cleanser than a meaningful statement. Okay, can't happen here, but unfortunately it did, didn't it? This is pop rock songwriting straight from the beginner's guide. Yes, it's up-tempo, but it's an entirely mechanical exercise. It's cobbled together from the most basic components. It's bright on the surface, but it's just utterly vacuous. It moves along at a reasonable pace, but it never actually goes anywhere, does it? Okay, Turner sings with a slight professional polish, I suppose, but there is nothing here to elevate. The song is utterly devoid of substance, and the vocals and the lyrics really are in keeping with that, unfortunately. Okay, Freedom Fighter up next. Again, this is a very overtly even, American-sounding pop rock song. It's got a chugging rhythm to it. Some attempt at an anthemic chorus, I think. I think that's what they were going for, but ultimately the effect is hollow. Although I have to say, this is probably Turner's best vocal melody on the album, and I have to say, the verses are admittedly catchy. There's some political edge, apparently, in the lyrics, but it's all very vague, to the point of irrelevance, I would have to say. Very repetitive use of the freedom fighter tag. It's got a little bit of energy to it, in fairness, but very little character. Yeah. Okay, Midtown Tunnel Vision is perhaps lyrically the most obvious attempt at contemporary relevance. Obviously, Turner's obviously under instruction to avoid anything remotely interesting in terms of lyrical themes. But in this case, it's just a slow, plodding song, isn't it? And I'm afraid it's another one that just goes absolutely nowhere. There's I suppose, urban imagery contained in the lyrics somewhere. But, yeah, it's just very... It has a certain groove to it, but it's still the same sort of stereotypical 1980s pop rock song. It's and any sense of momentum in this thing is purely illusionary. I mean, it really is. It's sufficiently produced, yet it's utterly, utterly inert, like too many of the songs, I'm afraid, on this album. And if I'm being honest, it is about as engaging as a bout of pneumonia. Okay, the album culminates with Difficult to Cure, the instrumental, and as we all know, is Blackmore and Airy's arrangement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, specifically the Ode to Joy, which is technically very impressive, and it's undeniably a bold move. And Blackmore's arrangement's muscular, Blackmore and Airy's arrangement, let's be fair, is muscular, it's confident, and, as a showcase for Ritchie's, classical leanings and ambitions, I think it works very well. Yet, I have to be honest, as a statement, it feels very much detached from the rest of the slop on the album. Because of that, it comes across as an isolated flourish, I think, rather than the culmination. It's not reflective of the rest of the record. And that, unfortunately, was that. Or perhaps fortunately, it could have been a double album. Now, before I continue with my evisceration of this record, it is, in fairness, or in the interest of full disclosure, only fair to point out that much of this material was originally worked up with Graham Bonnet still in the band, and no doubt written for his voice. Turner had very little actual input into the songwriting process, and this may well account for the somewhat disjointed feeling of much of the material. However, not to make excuses, my initial reaction upon first hearing this many years ago is this was a rancid little turd of an album, and not much has changed. The two best moments on this, well, unquestionably the two instrumentals, which I think speaks volumes in and of itself. And yes, all right, Spotlight Kid would redeem itself live somewhat, but I think that was about it. And as I said, the instrumentals were the obvious high points on it. It does highlight a particular weakness, and I have to say, Joe Lyn Turner is universally weak on this album. His voice is generic, his lyrics are uninspired, his delivery is ordinary, which you would have thought might have made for a better marriage, because that pretty much describes most of the material. Yet, it may have something to do with the fact that these songs were originally created with Bonnet in mind, it may, but it does not excuse the material, does it? It really doesn't. That being said, there are some nice Blackmore touches to be found here and there, but I have to make the point that sitting through 4 to 5 minutes of second-rate transatlantic pop, waiting for a few seconds of inspired, engaging Blackmore, does not a good song make. And seriously, the songwriting on this album is mediocre at best. If, on Down to Earth, as I argued, they become a second-rate foreigner, or sorry, second-rate Bad Company, here they've become a third-rate Journey. It really is that bad. Now, having described the album as second-rate transatlantic pop, I will just say that the production reflects the fact that the album is second-rate transatlantic pop, and say no more about it. Commercially, however, this did continue the upward trend in sales. The irony of life. But this increase was not exponential. It did the same decent business in Europe and Japan. It actually certified gold in Finland, Japan, and the UK, where, the UK that is, it did go on to be the band's best-selling album. And while it got to number 50 in the US, it again did not certify. So how does this stack up compared to their other albums? Well, if you thought the drop-off in quality between Long Live Rock and Roll and Down to Earth was severe, then all I can say in this case is how the mighty have fallen. I genuinely struggle to say anything positive about this. I genuinely do. However, we move on. For the next album, David Rosenthal replaced Don Airey, who I think went off to play with Ozzy Osbourne. From Blackmore to Osbourne, frying pan fire. Well, anyway, he survived. And this album was very much to be a stylistic continuation of Difficult to Cure. So, yeah. Somebody must have liked it. So, okay, apart from that, the band had remained the same. And again, in all fairness, one has to point out that this, for the first time, Joe Lyn Turner would now have full input into the songwriting. So we'll see if that makes a difference. Now, released in 1992, straight between the eyes, what do we get? Well, it opens nicely, I have to say. Death Alley Driver, which certainly has some urgency and aggression about it. Two adjectives sorely missing from the last album. And for once, I say, the energy feels genuine rather than functional or forced. Nice sharp riff, good tempo to this, really good playing from Blackmore, and even Turner sounds better, sounds fired up. As maybe he's just more comfortable with music he's had a hand in writing that was, written for his voice, which is perfectly legitimate. It's still firmly rooted in 1980s American rock, but as opposed to the majority of the last album being rooted in pop rock, this song is rooted in rock. You might be pushing it to go to hard rock, but it's certainly rock. The song has bite, it's got conviction, certainly one of the album's strongest moments, is it not? Okay, Stone Cold up next, the inevitable hit single. And it was actually a minor hit single, but again, it's another very clear continuation of the band's commercial trajectory. It's polished, it's melodic, it's impeccably structured, and it does exactly what it's designed to do. Turner's pretty controlled, reasonably emotive on it. Well, is he? But the song it's just pure AOR. It's tasteful, I suppose, but it's bloodless. And it's so far removed from anything that once made Rainbow distinctive. Okay, Bring on the Night, Dream Chaser. It's still firmly formulaic, I have to say, but for once this formula does have a certain bite to it. Yes, it features a strong, catchy AOR chorus, can't deny it, but there is a greater sense of drive and momentum than elsewhere on the album. There's hints of a certain depth to this one, actually. It's not just pure surface gloss. It never fully escapes its formulaic limitations or confines. Yeah, but you do get the feeling the band are trying a little harder on this one rather than simply going through the motions, which is a feeling I've had far too often when looking at these last two. I think Ritchie's pretty effective on this one. He does some really nice play. Injects a little bit of tension even, and very much a sense of forward motion. And JLT is perhaps one of his better efforts. And if nobody's looking or listening, I will admit this has always been a guilty pleasure. I've always had a soft spot for this track. Okay, they follow it up with Tight Squeeze, which finds this version of Rainbow at their most anonymous. There's some funk-inflected rhythms going on here, and a very lightweight groove, which does rather plant this firmly in US 1980s pop rock territory, does it not? It's competently performed, but it's utterly devoid of character or interest, for that matter. It exists, but it really doesn't leave a trace behind it. Okay, Tearing Out My Heart. This does at least attempt something a little interesting, and it has a more ambitious construction. It moves through a couple of reasonably effective shifts in mood and tempo, rather than just relying on a single idea, which is good. Blackmore much more pronounced on this, has much more presence on this song, and the arrangement suggests a reach towards something larger. However, the backing track may have promise. The top line doesn't. Turner really fails to do anything of note with this material, does he? Neither the verses nor the choruses really land, make any impact, do they? And again, which has become far too typical, the lyrical content is little more than generic bluster. There's some ambition in it, but ultimately, the execution falls a little short. Okay, Power up next. Remember when I was discussing Rainbow Rising, and in particular, Do You Close Your Eyes? I did make the point that we will hear this song again, didn't I? Well, here it is. The riff and the beat are almost identical. The difference here is, while weak as Do You Close Your Eyes may have been, Dio was at least able to inject a certain character and vitality into the vocal. But this Power, by contrast, is again, and I have to say this is straight out of the beginner's guide to writing an up-tempo pop rock song. It's mechanical, obvious, and utterly uninspired. Pedestrian does not begin to cover it. And given the caliber of musicians involved, it borders on embarrassing. It really does. Okay, Mistreated, which is it's another single. It's a slick mid-tempo piece. Again, it's just all very basic melody and polish. Anything to disguise a lack of substance. The vocals and the lyrics are once again painfully generic, and it's clearly chasing, that Foreigner-style hit. Well, perhaps not the album's worst offender in that regard. Turner he's comfortable with this type of material, but it's just whatever merits the song may have had, it's just smothered to the point of blandness. It's not an offensive song particularly, but it's just so unremarkable. Okay, Rock Fever up next, which it's a serviceable effort, I suppose. It's got a little bit of hard rock energy, or rock and roll energy, I think better describes it. But it never really fully commits to anything, does it? The riff's functional. Performances are solid. But it's routine. It's generic again. Cliched, predictable, competent yet uninspired. I have to say, totally forgettable. Alright, the album closes with Eyes of Fire, which is one of the album's more interesting and certainly atmospheric moments. It's an Eastern-tinged melody and harmonics to it. Very darker harmonics to it. It's more light and shade, there's more colours used from the palette, I think. It's not just this, one-trick pony song, as too many of these things have been. And a sense of tension is allowed to build and develop here, and it does, if you try hard enough, it does recall the band's, better days, that hint of mysticism almost about it. Definite hints of Gates of Babylon, one has to say, but please do not get too excited. Blackmore's best performance on the album, yeah, I think it is, which does make it musically at least a genuine highlight in relative terms. And a reminder perhaps what the band was still capable of, if they could be bothered to look beyond, the simple radio hit formulas. However, Turner is not Dio. And in truth, this does not come across as his true métier. Well, despite its strengths, it is clearly an attempt to recreate Gates of Babylon, so I have to say, it loses points for that straight away. But it's, the vocals and the lyrics again, bit of a letdown, vocal melody, unexceptional. Viewed in isolation, however, viewed in isolation in the context of the rest of the album, however, then this is almost a work of inspired genius, which again, I think, speaks volumes. And that was that. Now, in relative terms, I have to say this does constitute an improvement over Difficult to Cure. Difficult to think of it. They could have come up with anything worse, though, isn't it? And generally, Blackmore, as I said, is more present on this one, and he's playing superior, I think. There are more nice touches from him to be heard. Which again, yes, it's Blackmore. It's always good to hear. But I have to repeat the point that, that fact alone does not make for good songs or good albums, does it? On the positive side, Death Alley Driver, Bring on the Night, Tearing Out My Heart, and Eyes of Fire are decent to pretty good tracks. The rest, however, is utterly forgettable. Utterly. I will say I think Turner's improved, however. Again, this is relative. This is no doubt down to his increased involvement, I think, in the songwriting process. And occasionally his vocals do have more bite, more grit, more character to them. Again, this is relative. More balls, if you wish. But his voice remains generic, as do his lyrics and his vocal melodies. Now, in terms of production, this also is an improvement over Difficult to Cure. There's slightly more resonance to it, slightly more bottom end to it. It gives it a slight more weight to the proceedings. So I think Glover, it's not a stunning production by any stretch of anybody's imagination, but I think Glover achieved a better result here than he did on Difficult to Cure. In commercial terms, this would appear to be their most successful effort to date. Strong sales in their usual markets. On this occasion, it did hit number 30 in the US, but once again, it failed to certify. Oh, okay. There's 2 albums in the new direction. I might have already said that the band have gone from being a lackluster Bad Company to a even more lackluster journey. All right, that may be a subjective opinion, but let's look at the actual numbers here. Journey et al. Was still doing far better business, and if they were saying they were competing in similar markets or for a similar audience, Journey, Foreigner, Boston, whoever you want to name, was still selling far more records than were Rainbow at this stage. And one has to recognize the fact that this must have left Blackmore's ambitions or aspirations, at least to some degree, unfulfilled. Why was this the case? Well, look, we all know that quality has never been a deciding factor in success. But for these last couple of albums, there are just simply far too many inferior nondescript songs, and I'm afraid Turner does not help. He really doesn't. And on the face of it, he has the required attributes, to flourish, shall we say, in this, very commercial AOR polished musical path. And he's pretty good at it, but he's not great at it. And therein lies the difference, or the problem. I've made several foreigner comparisons. I know I'm not the only one to do this, but the point is that at this, certainly around here, Foreigner, Journey, etc., was simply, in the same vein of music as Blackmore is attempting here. Those other bands were simply writing superior songs. If that's your thing, and it's not mine, it's not a genre of rock music I'm particularly interested in, or I listen to much. But if that is your thing, can you honestly say that anything along the lines of Stone Cold or Mistreated are comparable to Foreigner's I Want to Know What Love Is? Or, to put it another way, is it not obvious why that sold millions and Rainbow's efforts did not? Even if you don't particularly like that type of rock music, there is a difference in quality that I just think is obvious. And, just to expand the point a little bit, or maybe just go off on a slight tangent. Blackmore always created his best music with much stronger, more unique singers, ones whose voices were instantly recognizable, with their own unique character, singers who could dominate songs. And I'm thinking, obviously, of Ian Gillan and Ronnie Dio here. And they, as people say, they were also characters. They were willing to fight their corner, fight for their own musical visions and ideas. Okay, they were not simply prepared to kowtow to Blackmore's every whim. And I'm afraid Joe Lyn Turner ticks none of those boxes. Okay, so back to the main question. Well, obviously neither of these albums can be in any way, shape or form described as great, can they? It's difficult to cure is, in my opinion, borderline pathetic. And while Straight Between the Eyes is better, it is very, very unexceptional and, for the most part, dire. And apart from Blackmore, the song, the rest of the band performed competently. They're very talented musicians, as we all know, but it's just that the basic songs, the backing tracks, they're just so dull. Just so one-note, so uninspired. And one would have to assume that they are quite beyond the remedial efforts of even the most talented musicians to make anything interesting out of them. At this point, it's not only difficult to recognize these two albums in the context of the band's history. It's almost impossible, isn't it? You listen to this, you think, is this really, well, we're talking about Blackmore, but he was the major songwriter, was he not? Is this really the guy that brought us the debut, Rising and Long Live Rock and Roll? Well, in some perverse way, and I underscore perverse, he may well have felt to some degree vindicated, since, as I've continued to say, in commercial terms, things were certainly looking up. The trend was going in the right direction. Although, as I've also alluded to, I think it probably still fell short of what Blackmore intended and desired or thought he was entitled to. Well, okay, that's that. We're now 6 albums in, and for those keeping count, it's a draw at the moment. 3 great albums and 3 not great albums. Let's be absolutely fair. Which means there are 2 to go. So next time should be the decider. Now, isn't that thrilling? Of course, given that I am judge, jury, and executioner here, I know what's coming, but I won't spoil the surprise. But you're going to have to wait until next time to find out exactly what my ultimate conclusion will be. But until then, Please feel free to like, to share, subscribe, all those good things. And of course, to comment. I'd really like to hear your views on this. I'm sure, my views are not universal, but, life's rich tapestry, etc., etc. But until then, as usual, I thank you very much for your indulgence. I wish you well. And until then, Maçhonquèrre.